May 19, 1943. North Atlantic, south of Iceland. The escort destroyer HMS Byron maintained sonar contact for 36 minutes before releasing its Hedgehog pattern. 48 men aboard U-954 died without surfacing. That same month, 41 U-boats were destroyed, 1/4 of Germany's active submarine fleet. For the first time in the war, Allied sonar, radar, and air coverage created a near-continuous detection network across the Atlantic. The technological tide had turned decisively. Between 1939 and early 1943, U-boats had sunk over 14 million tons of Allied shipping. After May 1943, losses fell below 1 million tons per year. This was not a change of luck, but of physics, engineering, and mathematics. The once invisible hunter had become the hunted. September 3, 1939. Off the Hebrides, Scotland. An Admiralty duty officer placed the first wartime convoy report beside the log entry of Athenia's torpedoing. 112 civilians died when U-30, commanded by Captain Lieutenant Fritz Julius Lemp, struck the passenger liner at 10:00 hours. The attack occurred without warning, violating pre-war prize rules that required submarines to surface and allow passengers to evacuate before sinking merchant vessels. Lemp had mistaken the liner for an armed merchant cruiser, a tragic error that would haunt him. Britain declared war the same day. Germany's submarine war against British commerce began immediately, though initially constrained by Hitler's political calculations and limited U-boat numbers. Admiral Karl Dönitz, Befehlshaber der U-Boote, commanding Germany's U-boat force from his headquarters in Wilhelmshaven, entered the war with 57 operational boats. His calculations were precise and troubling for Britain. To enforce an effective blockade of British sea lanes, Germany required approximately 300 operational U-boats, allowing 100 on patrol, 100 in transit to and from operational areas, and 100 in port for maintenance, repairs, and crew rest. With current strength barely exceeding 50 submarines, sustained offensive operations remained impossible. The mathematics were unforgiving. Yet early results exceeded Dönitz's most optimistic projections. German submarines operated with near impunity across vast stretches of ocean, sinking merchant ships faster than British shipyards could replace them. The Royal Navy possessed a detection system called ASDIC, named for the Allied Submarine Detection Investigation Committee that developed it during the First World War. The technology operated on straightforward principles of acoustic ranging. A transducer mounted on the ship's hull transmitted pulses of sound energy underwater at frequencies between 14 and 20 kHz, well above the range of human hearing. When these pulses struck a solid object, like a submarine's steel hull, they reflected back to the ship. By measuring the time between transmission and echo reception, operators could calculate range. By rotating the transducer through bearings, they could determine the submarine's direction. The Type 123 ASDIC sets installed on British escorts could detect submerged submarines to ranges of 1,500 to 2,000 yards under optimal conditions, but only directly ahead in a narrow cone. The beam swept forward like a flashlight in darkness, illuminating only what lay directly in its path while leaving vast blind zones to either side. An escort searching for submarines had to sweep the transducer back and forth slowly, listening for echoes on each bearing. The process was time-consuming and methodical. A submarine, located to the side or astern, remained undetected until the searching ship rotated enough to illuminate it. By then, the submarine might have moved. Performance degraded significantly when water temperature layers disrupted sound propagation. Warm surface water over cold deep water created boundaries called thermoclines that refracted acoustic signals, bending them away from targets or creating false echoes that mimicked submarines where none existed. Thermoclines occurred naturally throughout the Atlantic, varying with season, depth, and location. A submarine diving below a thermocline became nearly invisible to ASDIC transmissions from above. The acoustic signal would bend at the boundary layer, passing over the submarine without producing an echo. German submarine commanders quickly learned to exploit these natural advantages. Most problematic for Britain was that most merchant ships lacked escorts altogether. The Royal Navy entered the war with insufficient escort vessels to protect its extensive maritime commerce that sustained the island nation. Admiralty War Diary, entries from September 1939, noted escort availability as fragmentary at best. Convoy protection remained inconsistent and inadequate. Merchant ships sailed independently or in loosely organized groups with minimal protection. Some convoys had a single armed trawler or an elderly destroyer left over from the First World War, vessels barely capable of maintaining convoy speed, let alone conducting effective anti-submarine patrols. Others sailed completely unescorted, relying on radio silence, zigzag patterns, and routing instructions to avoid known submarine concentrations. German submarines exploited these gaps ruthlessly and systematically. A single U-boat could shadow an unescorted convoy for days, surfacing at night to attack repeatedly with its deck gun or torpedoes, then diving to evade the few escorts that might respond hours later after distress calls were received. By year's end, 114 Allied ships had been sunk, while only 9 U-boats were lost. The mathematics favored Germany overwhelmingly. Each U-boat represented approximately 1 year of construction time, thousands of man-hours of skilled labor, scarce strategic materials, and the training of 50 crew members over many months. Each could sink multiple merchant ships per patrol, sometimes a dozen or more. The exchange ratio meant that even with limited numbers barely exceeding 50 operational boats, German submarines were winning the tonnage war that Dönitz knew would ultimately determine Britain's survival. British scientists were already targeting this imbalance for reversal, but their solutions existed only in laboratory notebooks and experimental prototypes far from operational readiness. February 20, 1940. Kiel, Germany. Germania Werft Shipyards. A Type 7 hull received pressure hull rivet inspections before final acceptance. Workers checked each rivet for proper setting, looking for cracks or deformations that might fail under pressure. Acceptance papers lay on the foreman's desk awaiting signature. The submarine represented Germany's standard combat design, displacing 753 tons submerged, capable of diving to 230 meters test depth, with estimated collapse depth around 280 meters, armed with 5 torpedo tubes, 4 forward and 1 aft, carrying 14 torpedoes total, plus ammunition for the 88mm deck gun. Crew complement was 44 officers and enlisted men, living in extraordinarily cramped conditions for patrols lasting 6 to 8 weeks in the Atlantic. The Type 7 measured 67 meters in length, with a beam of 6.2 meters. Surface displacement was 769 tons, increasing to 871 tons submerged as ballast tanks flooded. 2 supercharged 6-cylinder diesel engines provided 3,200 horsepower for surface operations, giving maximum surface speed of 17 knots in calm seas. 2 electric motors, drawing power from massive lead-acid battery banks, filled the submarine with acrid fumes and provided 750 horsepower submerged, allowing 8 knots maximum submerged speed for brief periods during attacks or emergency escapes, or 4 knots for extended underwater operations when conserving battery power. Fuel capacity of 113 tons of diesel provided operational range of 8,500 nautical miles at cruising speed of 10 knots surfaced, sufficient for extended Atlantic patrols from French bases after France's fall. German doctrine emphasized surface coordination and centralized radio control under Dönitz's direction. U-boats attacked convoys at night on the surface whenever possible, using superior speed compared to merchant ships, low silhouette that made visual detection difficult beyond a few thousand yards, and the darkness that rendered Allied ASDIC useless, since acoustic detection only worked against submerged submarines. Surface attacks exploited every submarine advantage. Submerged operations exposed the boat to the one detection system that could find it consistently. This tactical approach proved devastatingly effective during the period German submariners called the First Happy Time, or Glückliche Zeit. Between September 1939 and mid-1940, German submarines sank over 1.1 million tons of Allied shipping, with only 30 boats on patrol monthly on average. The exchange ratio was extraordinary. Individual boats achieved remarkable success that made their commanders national celebrities in Germany. Otto Kretschmer in U-99 sank 47 ships, totaling approximately 300,000 tons, before his capture in March 1941. Günther Prien in U-47 sank 31 ships and became a national hero after penetrating the British home fleet anchorage at Scapa Flow and sinking the battleship Royal Oak in October 1939. Joachim Schepke in U-100 sank 37 ships before his death in March 1941. Herbert Werner, who would later command U-boats and survive the war to write the memoir Iron Coffins, characterized early patrols as methodical destruction conducted with professional precision. German crews operated under carefully orchestrated coordination through radio communications from Dönitz's headquarters. A U-boat sighting a convoy would transmit position, course, and speed to Bischstadt. Dönitz's operations staff analyzed all reports from submarines and shore stations, plotted convoy movements, and directed submarines to intercept positions calculated to place them ahead of convoy routes. Multiple boats would position themselves across the expected convoy path, then attack simultaneously from different directions in coordinated wolfpack tactics, overwhelming the few escorts present. British ASDIC detection success remained under 12% throughout 1940, according to Royal Navy operational analyses. The technology existed and functioned as designed, but doctrine and training lagged catastrophically behind equipment capability. Royal Navy escort crews lacked standardized procedures for prosecuting underwater contacts. No training manual existed. No school taught systematic anti-submarine tactics. Each escort commander developed personal techniques through trial, error, and survival. Some would race toward contacts at high speed, hoping to depth charge the submarine before it could maneuver away. Others approached slowly and carefully, maintaining continuous contact but giving the submarine time to dive deep and evade. No consensus existed on optimal depth charge patterns, attack geometry, or team tactics when multiple escorts were present. Most problematic was the fundamental limitation that depth charges required the attacking ship to pass directly over the submarine's estimated position. ASDIC contact was lost the moment the submarine passed under the ship's hull. By the time depth charges sank to detonation depth, set typically to 100 or 150 feet, the submarine had moved. German commanders exploited this blind spot systematically by turning sharply the moment they heard the attacking escort's propellers pass overhead. When charges detonated seconds later, the U-boat was frequently outside the lethal radius. Meanwhile, British research establishments at Fairlie in Scotland and Dunstanburgh in Northumberland worked intensively on improving sonar performance through systematic engineering. Scientists explored higher frequency transmissions to reduce signal loss through temperature layers. Physics dictated that lower frequencies penetrated thermoclines better, but provided less resolution and precision. Higher frequencies gave precise ranging but suffered greater attenuation and absorption by seawater. The optimal frequency became a carefully calculated compromise. Experimental sets tested stabilization systems that maintained beam accuracy despite violent ship motion in Atlantic storms. The challenge was formidable from engineering perspective. A destroyer, rolling in Atlantic swells, experienced angular movement of 20 degrees or more, sweeping the ASDIC beam across vast areas randomly unless stabilization compensated for ship motion. Gyroscopic stabilization could maintain beam orientation despite ship movement, but the engineering complexity was substantial. The system required precise mechanical components that could withstand corrosive salt water, violent motion, and extended operations measured in weeks without maintenance. Automatic range and bearing recorders needed development, so operators could track target movement continuously, without manual plotting that introduced errors, delays, and lost contacts. German submariners enjoyed tactical supremacy beneath the waves throughout 1940, unaware that laboratory notebooks were already sketching technologies that would render them obsolete. June 15, 1941. Lorient, France. Befehlshaber der U-Boote headquarters. Convoy plot pins moved westward across a wall map covering an entire wall of the operations room. Each pin represented an Allied convoy, tracked through intelligence sources and U-boat sightings. Lorient's signals room logged new departure windows as U-boats prepared for Atlantic patrols, coordinating schedules to maintain continuous pressure on convoy routes. After France's fall in June 1940, German submarines gained Atlantic bases at Lorient, Brest, Saint-Nazaire, La Pallice, and Bordeaux. These forward positions extended operational reach by over 1,000 nautical miles, compared to operating from German North Sea bases at Kiel or Wilhelmshaven or Baltic bases. The difference was strategically decisive and transformed the Battle of the Atlantic. U-boats could now patrol mid-Atlantic areas for extended periods, sustaining pressure on the convoy routes that carried American supplies to Britain. By mid-1941, 230 U-boats were in service, according to BU records, with approximately 60 to 70 operational at any given time. The others were in transit, under repair, conducting training, or awaiting crews. Production accelerated monthly from German shipyards at Kiel, Hamburg, Bremen, and Danzig, plus occupied yards in France. Dönitz's Wolfpack tactics, called Rudeltaktik in German, devastated Allied convoys through carefully orchestrated coordination. Individual U-boats, detecting convoys, reported to BU headquarters through encrypted radio transmissions using Enigma cipher machines. Dönitz's operations staff under Kapitän Zur, C. Eberhard Gott, analyzed all reports from submarines at sea and shore-based intelligence stations, plotted convoy movements on the large wall maps, and directed submarines to intercept positions calculated to place them ahead of convoy routes with favorable attack geometry. Multiple submarines coordinated attacks against single convoys, overwhelming escort defenses through simultaneous attacks from multiple directions that divided escort attention and created gaps in protective coverage. Convoy OG-71, sailing from Liverpool to Gibraltar in August 1941, suffered catastrophic losses that demonstrated Wolfpack effectiveness. The convoy consisted of 21 merchant ships, escorted by 2 destroyers and 4 corvettes, considered adequate protection by 1941 standards. 5 U-boats attacked over 3 nights in coordinated strikes. 9 merchant ships were sunk, totaling approximately 40,000 tons of shipping. 2 escorts were damaged by torpedoes but survived. Only 1 U-boat, U-559, sustained damage serious enough to abort its patrol and return to base. The battle demonstrated devastating effectiveness of coordinated tactics against convoys with inadequate escort strength. German confidence reached its apex during this period. BITU War Diary entries preserved in archives note repeatedly that Allied pursuit skills were not yet developed to effective levels. Escorts frequently lost contact after initial detection, and coordinated German tactics consistently overwhelmed defensive measures. Dönitz's staff calculated that sustaining current sinking rates would force Britain to negotiate peace before American industrial production could compensate for losses. The mathematics seemed to support German optimism. British countermeasures were expanding, but remained inadequate throughout 1941, despite recognition that the Battle of the Atlantic was becoming an existential threat to British survival. Production of ASDIC sets reached approximately 1,400 units during 1941, equipping both new construction escorts and retrofitting older vessels that had sailed without detection equipment. Yet, escort crews lacked standardized doctrine even as equipment improved. Each commander developed personal techniques through experience, but no systematic mechanism existed to collect these hard-won lessons and distribute them throughout the escort forces. Successful tactics remained local knowledge, confined to individual ships or squadrons. Failed tactics were repeated by different crews who had no way to learn from others' fatal mistakes. The organizational challenge was as significant as technical limitations. British escort forces included Royal Navy destroyers and corvettes, Royal Canadian Navy vessels operating from bases in Newfoundland and Halifax, and various auxiliary craft, including armed trawlers and converted merchant ships. Training standards varied dramatically. Equipment differed between ships and between navies. Communication procedures were inconsistent. Creating coherent anti-submarine warfare capability from these disparate elements required systematic approach to doctrine development, training standardization, and equipment integration. Those solutions were beginning to emerge in 1941, but had not yet reached operational effectiveness that would change the campaign's momentum. U-boats exploited this organizational weakness ruthlessly through 1941 and into 1942. Werner's testimony after the war described how German crews recognized that British escorts lacked coordinated search patterns and team tactics. Individual ships would pursue contacts aggressively, while others lost track of the submarine's position during the chase. German commanders learned to dive deep, often exceeding 200 feet, to get below the typical depth charge settings, run silent to minimize propeller and machinery noise, and wait motionless for pursuit to exhaust itself as frustrated escorts lost contact. The hunters frequently lost their prey through disorganization rather than technical limitation. A submarine that dove below 200 feet and remained motionless, shutting down all non-essential machinery, became nearly undetectable. ASDIC signals that did penetrate to such depths returned weak echoes, difficult to distinguish from false returns caused by thermoclines, schools of fish, or rocky bottom features. But institutional learning was accelerating on the Allied side, as survival necessity forced adaptation. Escort training schools established standardized procedures and systematic instruction. HMS Western Isles at Tobermory, Scotland, under command of the legendary Commodore Gilbert Stevenson, known throughout the escort forces as the Terror of Tobermory, put escort crews through intensive training that emphasized teamwork, rapid response to contacts, and aggressive tactics. Commander Frederick Walker developed systematic search patterns and team attack methods that he documented carefully and taught to other escort commanders. The Western Approaches Tactical Unit would soon transform these scattered lessons into systematic doctrine distributed throughout escort forces. In the next 18 months, equipment improvements, tactical innovations, and organizational learning would integrate into a detection system that German submariners would find inescapable. March 5, 1942. Liverpool, Western Approaches Command Headquarters. An escort group debrief sheet, with contact logs and time-bearing plots, was pinned beside radar and HFDF summaries on the operations room wall. The integration of multiple detection systems was beginning to change the geometry of undersea warfare in ways that German submarine commanders were only starting to comprehend. Captain Gilbert Roberts, a retired Royal Navy officer, recalled to duty, and Women's Royal Naval Service officers established the Western Approaches Tactical Unit at Derby House, a bomb-proof facility in Liverpool specifically built to survive German bombing raids, to translate field data from combat reports into standardized doctrine that could be taught systematically to all escort commanders. The unit occupied a large room with a plotting floor where simulated convoy battles played out, using models representing merchants, escorts, submarines, and aircraft. Experienced officers and RENS personnel controlled the forces. Escort commanders attended courses where they practiced coordinated tactics against submarine controllers who employed actual German methods, learned from interrogations, and captured documents. The exercises revealed patterns invisible in individual combat reports. Successful attacks followed specific sequences of detection, contact retention, coordinated approach, and weapon delivery. Failures stemmed from predictable mistakes like losing contact during pursuit, poor communication between escorts, and inadequate coordination. Type 144 ASDIC represented significant improvement over earlier Type 123 systems installed in 1939 and 1940. Detection ranges increased to approximately 2,500 yards under favorable conditions with calm seas and no thermoclines. Beam stability improved through gyroscopic stabilization that maintained transducer orientation despite ship pitch and roll in heavy weather. Automatic range and bearing recorders eliminated manual plotting errors and allowed operators to track target movement continuously without losing contact during recording. The system operated at frequency of approximately 14 to 18 kHz, carefully selected as compromise that balanced penetration through thermoclines against range resolution and target discrimination. But the true revolution came from combining ASDIC with high-frequency direction, finding, and 10-centimeter radar into integrated detection network, HFDF equipment, universally called HFDUF by operators, detected U-boat radio transmissions, and triangulated positions through bearing measurements from multiple stations. German submarines, operating under Dönitz's centralized control system, transmitted regular reports to BIDDA headquarters. These transmissions, even when encrypted using Enigma machines and kept brief to minimize detection risk, produced radio signals that HFDF stations could detect and locate through cross bearings. Shore-based stations in Britain, Iceland, Newfoundland, and Bermuda created overlapping coverage zones across the entire Atlantic. Ship-based HFDF allowed escorts to obtain bearings on U-boats transmitting near convoys, often detecting submarines before they could attack. 10-centimeter radar, developed by British scientists and engineers, using cavity magnetron technology pioneered at Birmingham University, revolutionized surface detection capabilities. Earlier, meter wavelength radar, operating at frequencies around 200 MHz, could detect ships at long range, but lacked resolution to detect submarine conning towers or periscopes in rough seas. The new centimetric radar, operating at wavelengths of approximately 10 centimeters, corresponding to frequencies around 3,000 MHz, provided resolution measured in feet rather than yards. Aircraft equipped with ASV Mark III radar could detect submarine conning towers from several miles away even at night or in poor visibility. Surface escorts equipped with Type 271 radar could detect periscopes at ranges up to 5,000 yards under good conditions, giving warning before submarines could approach close enough for torpedo attacks. Escort commanders learned through WATU training to position ships in standardized dispositions that maximize detection coverage around convoys. The tactical formations placed escorts at specific ranges and bearings from the convoy center, creating overlapping ASDIC and radar coverage zones with no gaps for submarines to exploit. When one ship gained ASDIC contact, others immediately maneuvered to supporting positions based on rehearsed procedures, drilled repeatedly until they became automatic. The submarine found itself tracked by multiple ships simultaneously, each providing redundant contact information and attacking from coordinated positions. Three-dimensional coverage emerged as aircraft joined the battle. Flying at altitude, aircraft equipped with ASV radar detected surfaced submarines before they could detect the approaching aircraft and dive. The Lee Light, a powerful searchlight mounted on aircraft, illuminated submarines at night during the final approach, allowing accurate depth charge or bomb attacks. German submarines attempting to transit the Bay of Biscay between French bases and Atlantic patrol areas faced continuous air patrols that forced them to remain submerged for extended periods, draining batteries and reducing mobility. July 18, 1942, North Atlantic, U-109 at patrol depth. A radio log noted brief transmissions to BDU reporting convoy contact. The soundman, wearing headphones, reported regular pings through turns, indicating British escorts maintained contact despite evasive maneuvers. Wolfgang Hirschfeld, U-109's experienced radio operator, would later write in his secret war diary that Allied sonar seemed to hear us breathe. The phrase captured growing terror among German submarine crews as they experienced something new and psychologically devastating. British escorts maintained ASDIC contact through evasive maneuvers that should have broken the acoustic lock according to all previous experience. The Type 147 ASDIC variants employed beamforming sword transducers that provided depth estimates through geometric calculation. Earlier ASDIC sets determined range and bearing but not depth, forcing escorts to estimate submarine depth based on diving time since last visual sighting and assumed speed. Estimates were frequently wrong by 50 feet or more, placing depth charge patterns above or below the target. The Type 147 system measured the time delay between direct echo from the submarine and bottom bounce echo that reflected off the ocean floor before returning to the ship. Through trigonometry, operators calculated target depth. The depth information appeared on indicators alongside range and bearing, giving escorts complete three-dimensional positioning. Contact retention through ship pitch and roll became possible through automatic stabilization systems that compensated for vessel movement. Earlier systems lost contact whenever the ship rolled, requiring operators to relocate the target manually. The new systems maintained beam orientation automatically despite violent motion in Atlantic storm. Escorts could now track submarines continuously during attack runs through seas that previously would have made sustained contact impossible. British trials and technical references preserved in archives. Place: Type 147 sea trials in May 1943. Building on developments throughout 1942, the operational impact appeared before official deployment as prototypes reached frontline ships. Late 1942 saw U-boat life expectancy fall to approximately 5 patrols from 12 patrols in 1941, according to BDU statistical analyses. German submarine commanders reported increasingly through war diaries that British escorts no longer lost contact during depth charge runs as they had previously. The Hunter could now maintain continuous tracking of its prey through the attack sequence. This continuous contact capability enabled precise weapon placement that made depth charge attacks far more lethal than before. Traditional attacks required the escort to pass directly over the submarine's estimated position, losing ASDIC contact precisely when accurate positioning mattered most. By the time depth charges sank to detonation depth and exploded, the submarine had moved unpredictably. German commanders exploited this blind spot systematically throughout 1940 and 1941 by turning sharply the moment they heard attacking escorts' propellers pass overhead. When charges detonated seconds later, the U-boat was frequently outside the lethal radius of approximately 25 feet for hull rupture. With Type 147's depth estimation and continuous tracking through the attack, British escorts could coordinate multiple ships in pre-planned attack patterns. One ship held continuous contact, while others maneuvered to bracketing positions based on the target submarine's known position, depth, and movement. When depth charges were released from multiple ships simultaneously, the submarine faced overlapping blast patterns that were nearly impossible to evade. German evasion tactics that had worked effectively in 1940 and 1941 became increasingly ineffective against these coordinated attacks. Diving deep no longer guaranteed escape because escorts knew exact depth. Running silent reduced detection range slightly, but could not break contact once established. Turning sharply during attacks might evade one ship's charges, but brought the submarine directly into another ship's pattern. The psychological impact on U-boat crews was profound and cumulative. Being hunted by an enemy who maintained continuous awareness of your position, depth, and movement created unbearable stress that accumulated over weeks at sea. February 2, 1943, Greenock, Scotland, Royal Navy Trials Jetty, a gunnery table, listed salvo patterns and fuse tests. ASDIC operators marked last good range before firing the experimental weapon. The arrival of Hedgehog represented another revolutionary advance in anti-submarine weapons that complemented improved sonar. Traditional depth charges forced escorts to pass over the target position, losing ASDIC contact during the critical attack phase when positioning accuracy mattered most. Hedgehog threw 24 contact-fused bombs ahead of the attacking ship, while ASDIC contact was maintained continuously throughout the attack sequence. The weapon consisted of 24 spigot mortars arranged in 4 rows of 6 launchers mounted on the foredeck ahead of the bridge. Each projectile weighed 65 pounds, with a 35-pound Torpex warhead providing explosive power superior to TNT. The mortars fired simultaneously in a carefully timed sequence, throwing projectiles in a pattern that covered an ellipse approximately 130 feet long by 40 feet wide, when they entered the water 250 yards ahead of the firing ship. Crucially, the bombs only detonated on physical contact with a submarine's hull. They did not explode when hitting water or sea bottom. This meant that if no explosion occurred, the submarine had evaded the attack and remained at the last known ASDIC position. Escorts could immediately re-attack, without waiting minutes for depth charge turbulence to clear and water to settle enough for ASDIC to regain contact. Royal Navy assessments documented in Admiralty reports showed dramatic improvements in lethality per attack. Traditional depth charge attacks achieved kills in approximately 1 out of 60 attacks, a daunting ratio that required escorts to conduct dozens of attacks to destroy a single submarine. Hedgehog attacks achieved kills in approximately 1 out of 6 attacks, nearly a tenfold improvement. This dramatic increase stemmed from 2 factors working together. First, maintaining continuous ASDIC contact through the attack provided far more accurate target positioning than estimates based on last known location. Second, the concentrated pattern of 24 bombs created high probability of hit within the target ellipse, requiring less precise positioning than depth charge patterns that covered larger areas with lower explosive density. Hedgehog entered service gradually during 1943 as production ramped and installations proceeded. Early installations experienced mechanical problems with misfires and launcher malfunctions that required engineering corrections. Training took time as crews learned optimal firing procedures, pattern placement, and attack geometry. But by mid-1943, Hedgehog-equipped escorts were destroying U-boats at unprecedented rates that shocked BITU staff analyzing loss reports. German submarine commanders reported hearing rapid multiple explosions that sounded distinctly different from depth charges. The explosions came from ahead relative to the attacking escort, not from astern as with traditional attacks, suggesting British escorts possessed new weapons with different attack geometry. BSTU intelligence officers struggled to understand what these combat reports meant. They lacked physical evidence of the weapon, since Hedgehog attacks that missed left no debris field or unexploded ordnance on the sea bottom. Successful Hedgehog attacks typically destroyed submarines completely, leaving few survivors and little wreckage. The first captured Hedgehog equipment reached German intelligence only in late 1943, by which time the weapon had already claimed dozens of U-boats. March 20, 1943. Liverpool, WATU floor. Derby House. Wrens and officers ran a war game simulation on the large plotting floor. Peephole observers, positioned above the floor, tracked a simulated wolfpack approach against a model convoy, noting tactical decisions and outcomes. The Western Approach's tactical unit had evolved into a sophisticated training and analysis center that transformed anti-submarine warfare from individual ship actions into coordinated group operations. Captain Roberts's curriculum formalized escort group roles, with each ship having assigned responsibilities during convoy defense and submarine prosecution. The unit developed specific tactical patterns called finding and finishing that maximized contact retention and coordinated attacks. When a submarine was detected, nearby escorts immediately executed rehearsed maneuvers without waiting for detailed orders. One ship maintained continuous ASDIC contact, designated the holding ship, while others positioned for flanking attacks from predetermined bearings. Aircraft coordinated with surface ships through standardized procedures that integrated air and sea assets seamlessly. If the submarine dove deep, attempting to escape below effective ASDIC range, escorts maintained slow-speed tracking until the submarine was forced to surface by battery depletion or lack of air for the crew. Sir Peter Gretton, an experienced escort commander who later wrote extensively about anti-submarine warfare, assessed that WATU made officers really think systematically about anti-submarine tactics rather than relying on instinct and improvisation. The unit transformed individual ship actions into coordinated group operations, where each ship knew its role and executed it precisely. Modern scholarship emphasizes WATU's training impact, while cautioning against attributing all Allied success to this single factor. Multiple improvements converged simultaneously during 1942 and 1943. Better sensors provided longer detection ranges and continuous tracking. Improved weapons like Hedgehog increased kill probability per attack. Increased escort numbers from accelerated construction programs allowed stronger convoy protection. Long-range air coverage closed the mid-ocean gap that submarines had exploited. Doctrine development through WATU tied these elements together into integrated system, but WATU's role in accelerating organizational learning was significant and measurable. Escort groups that trained at WATU achieved higher success rates in subsequent combat compared to groups without such training. The exercises revealed tactical patterns that were not obvious from individual combat reports. Successful submarine hunts followed predictable sequences that could be taught. Failures resulted from specific errors that could be corrected through training. The systematic approach transformed anti-submarine warfare from art dependent on individual commander skill into science that could be taught to average officers and crews with predictable results. Convoy battles during March 1943 began demonstrating dramatic new patterns. Convoy SC 130 crossed the Atlantic with 42 merchant ships, escorted by 5 destroyers and 4 corvettes, considered moderate strength by 1943 standards. 5 U-boats attacked over 3 days in coordinated wolfpack tactics ordered by BDU. All 5 submarines were sunk by the escort group using coordinated attacks. Not a single merchant ship was lost. This exchange ratio was unthinkable in 1940 or even 1942. German submarine commanders reported feeling hunted continuously, with no opportunity to attack safely. British escorts appeared to know where every submarine was positioned before attacks could develop. If you value rigorous historical documentaries revealing how technology shapes warfare, please subscribe to support continued research into World War II's pivotal technological battles. May 1st through 31st, 1943. North Atlantic Theater. Daily Admiralty situation maps marked losses in red for merchant ships and black for U-boats. The markers inverted dramatically from prior years in ways that shocked observers on both sides. 118 U-boats at sea during May suffered 41 losses, representing 25% of operational boats destroyed in a single month. Allied merchant losses fell to 58 ships, the lowest monthly total since American entry into the war. This became known as Black May among both German and Allied naval personnel, the turning point when Germany's submarine offensive collapsed under weight of integrated Allied detection technology. BDU war diary entries preserved in German naval archives document growing alarm as loss reports arrived daily throughout May. Dönitz ordered temporary withdrawal from North Atlantic convoy routes on May 24, 1943. For the first time in the war, German submarines were pulled back from their primary hunting grounds because losses exceeded sustainable rates. The decision was agonizing for Dönitz, who had advocated unrestricted submarine warfare as Germany's path to victory, but mathematics were inescapable. May 1943 marked 25% loss of operational U-boats in a single month. If even 15% of boats on patrol were lost each month, no crew would statistically survive more than 7 patrols. With crew training times measured in 6 to 9 months, and submarine construction times measured in 18 to 24 months, such losses could not be sustained. Convoy battles during Black May illustrated the technological reversal. ONS-5 departed Liverpool in late April, with 43 merchant ships escorted by 2 destroyers, 4 corvettes, 2 rescue ships, and supported by long-range aircraft. 30 U-boats were vectored to intercept Baibidu in what should have been overwhelming German numerical advantage. The battle lasted 6 days across over 1,000 miles of ocean. 13 merchant ships were sunk, representing significant losses. But the escort group destroyed 7 U-boats and severely damaged 5 others that barely reached French bases. The exchange ratio, which had heavily favored Germany throughout 1941 and 1942, had reversed completely. Germany lost 7 U-boats, worth approximately 100 million Reichsmarks, and 350 trained crew members, to sink 13 merchant ships worth perhaps $5 million, and quickly replaceable by American shipyards. SC-130 demonstrated even starker reversal. The convoy of 43 ships, escorted by 8 warships, crossed the Atlantic in mid-May. 7 U-boats attacked in coordinated wolfpack. The escort group, commanded by Commander Gretton, who had trained at Watteau, executed textbook coordinated defense. 0 merchant ships were lost. 5 U-boats were sunk by the escorts using combinations of ASDIC tracking, Hedgehog attacks, and coordinated depth charge patterns. 2 more U-boats were severely damaged and forced to abandon attacks. Type 147 equipped escorts combined with HF-DF, direction finding, long-range B-24 Liberator aircraft with improved radar, and escort carriers providing continuous air coverage closed the mid-ocean air gap that submarines had exploited since 1939. Among May's losses was U-954, sunk by HMS Byron on May 19 after 36 minutes of continuous ASDIC tracking, followed by accurate Hedgehog attack that detonated on first salvo. Aboard U-954 was Oberleutnant Zur, C. Peter Dönitz, the Admiral's 24-year-old son. All 47 crew members died when the submarine imploded under depth charge pressure after Hedgehog bombs ruptured the pressure hull. The personal blow mirrored the strategic one. German submarine warfare was dying beneath the weight of integrated Allied detection technology that stripped away the invisibility submarines required for survival. Wolfgang Hirschfeld, U-109's radio operator, survived multiple patrols during Black May and subsequent months. His secret war diary, hidden and preserved throughout the war, recorded the psychological devastation of being continuously tracked. Every depth charge pattern came closer. Every evasion maneuver seemed anticipated by escorts who maintained contact regardless of tactics. The ocean had become transparent to Allied sensors. Submarines that had hunted convoys methodically now fled desperately from escorts that pursued with relentless efficiency. August 10, 1943. Bay of Biscay and Lorient approaches. A Coastal Command Operations Board listed paired ASV radar sorties coordinated to provide continuous coverage of U-boat transit routes. U-boat departure times were plotted against moon phases and tidal conditions to predict submarine movement. The Bay of Biscay had become a killing ground, where submarines faced coordinated air and sea patrols equipped with 10-centimeter radar and lee lights for night attacks. German submarines transiting from French bases to Atlantic operational areas ran a deadly gauntlet before even reaching patrol areas. German doctrine required submarines to transit the bay on the surface at night, charging batteries and making maximum speed to minimize time in the dangerous zone. This had worked effectively from 1940 through 1942, when Allied radar operated on meter wavelength frequencies that German submarines could detect with METOX warning receivers. Detection provided 30 to 40 seconds warning, enough time to dive before aircraft could attack. But 10-centimeter radar developed by British scientists was undetectable by METOX receivers. Allied aircraft appeared without warning from darkness, illuminated submarines with powerful laylight searchlights mounted beneath the fuselage, and attacked before crews could dive. BDU records documented sustained weekly losses in Bay of Biscay transit areas. 4 to 6 U-boats per week were lost to air attacks during peak periods in mid-1943. Time spent on surface dropped toward 10% for many patrols as commanders chose to transit submerged, despite drastically slower speed and battery drain. Submerged speed averaged 7 knots compared to 17 to 18 knots surfaced. Battery endurance on Type 7 submarines was approximately 90 nautical miles when running submerged continuously. This drastically reduced operational flexibility and patrol endurance. Submarines that previously reached patrol areas with full batteries now arrived depleted, limiting time on station and requiring more frequent returns to base for recharging. Escort carrier groups joined Coastal Command aircraft in hunting submarines systematically. HMS Byron, Archer, Tracker, and other escort carriers operated hunter-killer groups specifically targeting U-boats in transit between bases and operational areas. The combination of persistent air coverage from carriers and coordinated surface escorts made Bay of Biscay transit extremely hazardous. Survivors described feeling hunted constantly from the moment they departed Lorient until they reached open Atlantic waters hundreds of miles west of France. Even then, long-range Allied aircraft patrolled far into the Atlantic, keeping submarines submerged and limiting mobility. February 6, 1944. Kiel and Bergen bases. Maintenance logs listed installations of METOX, Naxos, and snorkel fittings on boats preparing for patrol. Crews signed off on installations after dockside trials tested equipment functionality. German countermeasures arrived progressively as the technological arms race continued. Radar warning receivers were supposed to provide advance warning of Allied radar emissions. Snorkels allowed submarines to run diesel engines while remaining submerged at periscope depth, theoretically eliminating surface vulnerability to radar and visual detection. METOX and Naxos receivers covered different frequency ranges, attempting to detect various Allied radar types. METOX detected meter wavelength radar around 200 MHz. Naxos attempted to detect centimeter wavelength radar around 3000 MHz that METOX could not receive. But effectiveness remained mixed despite engineering sophistication. 10-centimeter Allied radar still surprised submarines despite receiver improvements, suggesting detection range remained inadequate or receiver sensitivity insufficient. Post-war analyses revealed that METOX receivers actually emitted detectable signals on harmonic frequencies that Allied aircraft homed on. The warning receiver paradoxically made submarines more vulnerable rather than less, creating tragic irony where countermeasure defeated itself. Snorkels provided genuine advantage, but created new vulnerabilities that limited effectiveness. The device, originally developed by Dutch submarine designers before the war, allowed submarines to run diesel engines at periscope depth, drawing air through a raised tube, fitted with a float valve that closed automatically if waves washed over the head valve. This eliminated the need to surface for battery charging that exposed submarines to radar and visual detection. But snorkels restricted speed to approximately 7 to 8 knots, barely faster than battery-powered submerged operations. The raised mast created a radar return that Allied aircraft and surface ships could detect at several miles range. Snorkel operation required precise depth control to prevent the submarine from broaching accidentally. Engine operation with snorkel drew tremendous amounts of air, creating pressure variations inside the submarine that alternately compressed and rarefied atmosphere as the head valve opened and closed with wave action. Crews suffered painful ear injuries from rapid pressure changes. Carbon monoxide from diesel exhaust accumulated dangerously if snorkel operation continued too long without ventilating the boat at full surface. RAF Coastal Command assessments documented in operational reports showed successful interceptions of snorkel-equipped boats through radar detection and visual sightings. Allied 10-centimeter radar detected snorkel masts at ranges of 3 to 5 miles depending on sea state. The expected invisibility did not materialize as German engineers had hoped. Meanwhile, Allied sonar continued evolving through 1944. Type 147Q and United States Navy QGB sonar incorporated improvements based on 30 months of intensive operational experience. Automatic range recording eliminated manual plotting. Continuous bearing tracking maintained lock on maneuvering targets. Improved depth estimation provided three-dimensional positioning accurate within 5 feet vertically. Each enhancement made submarine evasion more difficult and detection more reliable. September 12, 1944. Hamburg, Blohm and Voss shipyards. A Type XXI pressure hull section slid into final assembly position on the construction ways. An inspector ticked off battery compartment welds on his checklist, verifying each met specification. The electroboot represented Germany's radical response to Allied detection superiority that had made conventional submarine operations suicidal. Type XXI featured revolutionary design optimized for submerged operations rather than surface transit. Submerged speed exceeding 17 knots on electric power alone was unprecedented, faster than most Allied escorts could maintain. Large battery capacity, triple that of Type 7, enabled extended underwater operations measured in days rather than hours. Streamlined hull reduced underwater resistance by 40% compared to earlier designs. Hydraulic torpedo reload systems allowed firing all 6 bow tubes, reloading, and firing again within 20 minutes without surfacing. Improved living conditions for extended patrols included individual bunks for all crew members, luxury unheard of in earlier submarines where crew members hot-bunked. Korvettenkapitein Adalbert Schnee, an experienced submarine commander with multiple successful patrols, commanded U-2511, one of the few Type XXI submarines to conduct war patrols. His post-war testimony to Allied interrogators described a revolutionary design that arrived too late to influence the war's outcome. Submerged speed exceeding 17 knots meant the Type XXI could outrun any Allied escort on the surface and reposition rapidly between attacks. The large battery enabled sustained high-speed submerged operations, impossible for earlier types, that could maintain high speed for only minutes before exhausting batteries. Snorkel eliminated surface vulnerability entirely during battery charging, allowing the submarine to remain submerged for weeks continuously. But dispersed production methods, strategic bombing of component factories, transportation disruptions from Allied air attacks, and critical material shortages delayed deployment catastrophically. Modular construction, intended to accelerate production, by building hull sections at different factories and assembling them at shipyards, instead introduced quality control problems. Workers unfamiliar with submarine construction at automotive and railcar factories made assembly errors that required extensive correction at final assembly. Critical components like periscopes and electric motors arrived late or damaged during transport. 118 Type XXI submarines were commissioned before war's end in May 1945. Only 2 conducted operational patrols. U-2511 and U-3008 sailed in April 1945. Neither sank Allied ships. Schnee encountered Allied ships during his patrol but chose not to attack, recognizing the war was effectively over and attacks would only prolong inevitable defeat. Allied assessments after capturing Type XXI submarines at German bases acknowledged the design's sophistication and revolutionary nature. Engineering teams examined boats thoroughly, analyzing every system. If deployed in significant numbers during 1943, with experienced crews and adequate support infrastructure, the Electroboot might have prolonged the Battle of the Atlantic significantly and complicated Allied anti-submarine operations. But arriving in April 1945 with inexperienced crews, hastily trained, insufficient spare parts, fuel shortages, and Allied control of sea and air, the revolutionary design changed nothing strategically. Technology alone could not reverse strategic defeat when industrial capacity, trained personnel, operational opportunities, and logistical support had evaporated. May 10, 1945. Flensburg, Naval High Command. Final BDU loss tables were assembled as Germany faced imminent surrender. Totals by cause and month were typed for Allied review teams that would arrive within days. The accounting was devastating beyond comprehension. Of approximately 1,100 U-boats commissioned between 1939 and 1945, 784 were destroyed by enemy action. Among roughly 39,000 submariners who served in U-boats during the war, approximately 30,000 were killed. The casualty rate approached 75%, making the U-boat service statistically the most dangerous military assignment in human history, exceeding even Bomber Command's approximately 45% losses or Japanese kamikaze pilot losses. Dernitz's final reports, preserved in captured German naval archives, acknowledged that acoustic detection broke the back of the submarine campaign. Allied sonar, combined with radar coverage and long-range aircraft, created a detection network that German submarines could not evade, despite all countermeasures and tactical innovations. Monthly loss charts showed the dramatic spike in May 1943 when Allied detection capability crossed the threshold where submarines lost their primary tactical advantage: invisibility. After Black May, U-boat operations continued for 2 more years, but never regained strategic effectiveness that had characterized 1940 and 1941. The escorts that once filled the North Atlantic, protecting convoys, were rapidly decommissioned after Germany's surrender on May 8, 1945. Their mission accomplished and their services no longer required. The price counted in human terms was staggering, beyond simple statistics. 30,000 dead submariners represented young men with average age around 21, who served knowing statistically they would not survive the war. Yet they continued sailing, mission after mission, because military orders demanded it, because comradeship bound crews together in facing shared danger, and because desertion meant execution. The technological revolution that made submarine warfare untenable arrived gradually, through cumulative improvements, rather than single breakthrough. Each advancement in Allied detection capability stacked upon previous advances until the cumulative effect became overwhelming and insurmountable. Herbert Werner survived the war against overwhelming odds and wrote Iron Coffins in 1969, one of the most detailed and psychologically revealing first-hand accounts of U-boat service. His memoir captured the psychological deterioration that occurred as Allied technology progressively stripped away submarine invisibility. The confident attacks of 1940, conducted almost leisurely against unprotected convoys, gave way to cautious approaches in 1941, then desperate evasion. By 1943 and 44, crews that once hunted convoys methodically found themselves hunted continuously with no respite. The ocean ceased being a refuge, offering concealment, and became a killing ground, where every sound might be an escort's sonar pulse seeking them, where every maneuver might be anticipated, where survival depended on luck as much as skill. 1946 through 1960s. London, Washington, and NATO research centers. Post-war committee reports filed into archives. Captured boats were evaluated exhaustively at sea. The Allied Anti-Submarine Warfare Assessment Committee concluded unambiguously that acoustic detection broke the back of the German submarine campaign. This assessment, based on comprehensive analysis of patrol reports from both sides, loss records, technological developments, and captured German documents, became the official historical verdict. The Battle of the Atlantic was won not through any single factor, but through systematic integration of improved sensors, effective weapons, comprehensive training, and operational doctrine that denied submarines the invisibility they required for survival. Type XXI submarines influenced post-war design philosophy for all naval powers. The United States, Britain, and Soviet Union all studied captured electroboots intensively. The concept of submarines optimized for submerged operations rather than surface transit became standard worldwide. American fleet submarines were modernized under the Guppy program, adopting streamlined hulls and increased battery capacity, inspired directly by Type XXI. Soviet Whiskey-class submarines showed obvious Type XXI influence, but the Type XXI's late arrival meant it did not affect wartime outcomes, serving only as template for future development. Wattu's model of integrating science with operations shaped NATO anti-submarine warfare training throughout the Cold War. The lesson that technology required systematic doctrine development and comprehensive training to achieve effectiveness became foundational to post-war naval planning. Modern naval warfare centers at Newport and elsewhere trace organizational lineage directly to Wattu's pioneering work in operational analysis. The systematic approach of collecting combat data, analyzing patterns, developing doctrine, and training personnel became standard methodology across all warfare areas. Sonar technology evolved continuously through subsequent decades. Continuous wave modes replaced pulse systems, providing better Doppler information about target movement. Automatic range recording became universal standard. Signal processing using electronic computers detected submarines through increasingly sophisticated analysis of acoustic return. Early passive sonar arrays that listened for submarine-generated noise rather than actively transmitting pulses traced technological lineage to wartime active sonar breakthroughs. The principle remained constant across all generations. Deny submarines the invisibility that makes them effective weapons. Modern nuclear submarines are quieter than World War II diesel submarines by several orders of magnitude, producing noise levels sometimes below natural ocean ambient sound. Yet modern sonar systems detect them through increasingly sophisticated signal processing that extracts submarine signatures from background noise, through network sensors that combine information from multiple platforms, and through decades of accumulated knowledge about submarine acoustics. The technological competition between submarine stealth and detection systems that intensified during the Battle of the Atlantic continues in progressively more sophisticated forms. The Battle of the Atlantic's lessons extended far beyond naval technology. The importance of organizational learning, systematic doctrine development, combined arms integration, and persistent incremental improvement shaped modern military institutions worldwide. Wattu's approach of systematically analyzing operations, extracting lessons, developing standardized doctrine, and comprehensively training personnel became the model for military professional development across all services and nations. The technological revolution that defeated German submarines demonstrated conclusively that wars are won by integrated systems, not individual weapons, regardless of sophistication. Dönitz wrote in captured post-war documents that the enemy has learned to see in the dark, acknowledging that Allied detection capabilities had overcome the ocean's opacity. Post-war navies learned to measure acoustic properties systematically, model underwater sound propagation mathematically, and teach detection skills through rigorous training programs. Sonar operators received extensive instruction in acoustic physics, signal interpretation, and tactical employment. Engineers developed progressively more sophisticated detection systems. Naval strategists integrated anti-submarine warfare into comprehensive operational doctrine. The transformation that began with primitive ASDIC in 1939 continued through decades of refinement, extending into the present day. The Battle of the Atlantic's inflection, in May 1943, emerged from measurable convergence of multiple factors working synergistically. Improved sonar, particularly the Type 147 family, provided three-dimensional tracking and continuous contact retention. Forward-throwing weapons like Hedgehog eliminated detection blind spots during attacks and increased lethality tenfold. Air-sea radar coverage from long-range aircraft and escort carriers closed the mid-ocean gap submarines had exploited. Systematic training through institutions like WATU converted technology and data into effective doctrine. German countermeasures, including snorkels, radar detectors, and the promising Type XXI design, did not mature in time to reverse the outcome or even significantly delay it. The campaign's final accounting tells a story beyond mere statistics and tonnage totals. 41 U-boats destroyed in May 1943 represented over 2,000 men killed in a single month, each death a personal tragedy for families and communities. 30,000 submariners dead across 6 years of war meant countless families destroyed, communities devastated, and an entire generation lost. Technology shaped this human catastrophe directly and unavoidably. Allied sonar transformed the underwater battlefield from German hunting ground to Allied killing ground. With mathematical precision, the invisible hunters became visible prey through systematic application of physics and engineering. This transformation demonstrates that organized learning and integrated technology, not numbers alone, determined control of Atlantic sea lanes. German submarines were technically sophisticated machines, well-designed and well-built, operated by trained and motivated crews, fighting with considerable skill and courage. But they faced an enemy who systematically solved the detection problem through patient engineering, rigorous testing, comprehensive training, and relentless operational refinement. The cumulative effect of these improvements created detection capability that German countermeasures could not overcome, despite desperate efforts. The lesson resonates beyond naval warfare into all domains of modern conflict. Technological competition in warfare follows similar patterns repeatedly. One side achieves temporary advantage through innovation. The opponent develops countermeasures to negate the advantage. The first side responds with improved systems that overcome the countermeasures. The cycle continues until one side gains decisive superiority through better science, more effective production, superior training, or more comprehensive doctrine. In the Battle of the Atlantic, that decisive superiority belonged to the Allies, who transformed submarine detection from primitive acoustic ranging into integrated, three-dimensional tracking that stripped invisibility from German U-boats systematically and thrive irreversibly. Modern submarines employ sophisticated quieting techniques, including sound-dampening mounts, carefully designed propellers, anechoic hull coatings, and advanced propulsion systems. Modern sonar uses passive detection through towed arrays, fixed ocean floor installations, and signal processing that can track submarines across entire ocean basins. The technological arms race continues in forms far more sophisticated than World War II participants could have imagined or predicted. But the fundamental principle remains unchanged. Submarines depend absolutely on invisibility for tactical effectiveness, and detection systems exist specifically to deny that invisibility. The contest between submarine stealth and sonar detection that intensified during the Battle of the Atlantic shapes naval warfare to this day, and will continue shaping it into the foreseeable future. The men who died aboard U-boats between 1939 and 1945 were casualties of technological warfare they could not escape regardless of skill or courage. Their bravery, tactical skill, and unwavering determination could not overcome physics and engineering systematically applied against them by an enemy with superior resources and organizational learning capability. Their sacrifice illuminates how technology shapes human conflict, and how technological advantage, once firmly established, becomes nearly impossible to reverse through willpower alone. The German U-boat crews who encountered Allied sonar realized they were no longer invisible. That realization came too late to save them or alter outcomes, but their experience teaches lessons about technology and warfare that remain profoundly relevant.